Welcome to the Mike Litton Experience Podcast. Mike has over 31 years experience in real estate, finance, and investing. He's passionate about being a father, a teacher, a realtor, an investor, and a leader. Everyone has a story, and our passion is to help them tell it. And now, introducing the host of the Mike Litton Experience, Mike Litton.
So what can you expect from the Mike Litton Experience? You can expect stories that will inspire, motivate, advice that will sharpen your focus, and expert information on real estate, finance, and market conditions. Zack Ellison, thank you so much for being our guest on the Mike Litton Experience. I'm super excited for our time together. And like we talked about before we hit record, everybody has a story. And our passion is to help them tell it. So with your permission, we're going to start with where you were born, go all the way up to today. And then we want to talk about all the amazing things you're doing with A.R.I. and specifically the outreach, like the things that you're doing to help people make the right types of decisions when it comes to debt and that kind of thing. So tell us about where you were born.
Well, first, Mike, thanks for having me. Appreciate
Great
it.
to have you, bud.
I really like your show. You're prolific and you've got some great guests, so I appreciate you having me on.
I'm excited, man.
So yeah, let's go back to the beginning. I'm 43 now. I was born in the very beginning of the 80s to a single mom. She had me when she was 19, and my dad has never been in the picture, so I've never met my dad. I am in touch with his family and know his family well, but long story short, it was very hard for us economically in the 80s and 90s when I was growing up.
Yeah.
My mom was a radio announcer. She was actually the voice of WGBH in Boston in the late 80s, early 90s.
Okay.
But back then, radio, it didn't really pay that well. And also it was very male dominated. Think about Howard Stern, for instance.
Yeah.
It was very much like that. And so she basically suffered a lot from gender discrimination, which today I don't think would be tolerated. But back then it was very acceptable. And so she essentially didn't get the opportunities that she deserved, despite being one of the most talented voiceover artists and radio announcers in the country.
Yeah.
But long story short, it really taught me a lot because I grew up with very low income. Lived in 18 different places before I got to college, and it's kind of humbling as a kid to grow up like that. And my mom did a great job of keeping us in a good school district. I grew up mainly in Brookline, Massachusetts, which is right next to Boston. It's basically like Boston, but it's a very nice area and very good public schools. And so she was able to keep us in Brookline for the majority of my childhood. And so I got a very good education despite not having a lot of money. And so I owe a lot of credit to her for keeping us in that school district, but also really focusing on my education and giving me a lot of attention, outside of school. And so for us, education was always first and foremost because it's really, as you know, the great equalizer. Right? You can start with nothing, but if you're able to access education, you work your butt off, you can catch up and you can do amazing things.
Yeah, it's the truth, man. It really is. So the Brookline that we're talking about, is that the same place where the Brookline Country Club is, where the Ryder Cup thing happened with that long putt and the US won?
It is.
Oh, that's awesome.
What's funny, Mike, is I went to high school in Chestnut Hill, which is right next to that country club.
Yeah.
And I got a full scholarship to Beaver Country Day in the late 90s. And that was because I was scoring very high on the PSATs, the pre-SATs.
Right.
I think I had 99th percentile on the PSATs. And I also was a very good basketball player at that age and was one of the best point guards in New England. And so I got a full ride there. And for what it's worth, for sports buffs, Beaver Country Day in the late 90s was a powerhouse in hoops.
Yeah.
And we had a guy that came just before me named Wayne Turner, who was a McDonald's All-American and went to Kentucky to play for Rick Pitino.
Oh,
and so he was on the championship team that had Walter McCarty, Tony Delk, Antoine Walker, and I think was on the cover of 2 Sports Illustrateds. And he was a stud. And so I basically was the point guard that came in after him. And
cool.
if you go to Beaver Country Day, and for what it's worth, Beaver Country Day now has really grown and become more prominent.
Yeah.
And I think Robert Kraft's grandkids go there or went there, and a bunch of good, good ball players have come out of there, but
Yeah.
also a lot of very, wealthy people have gone through there over the last 20 years. But if you go to their gym, you'll see Wayne's got his banner in the gym with,
Yeah.
I think he had 2,500 plus career points. And then on a much smaller banner on a list with other players, you'll see me in the 1,000 point club.
Oh, there you
Just a
go.
little guy.
Hey, at least you're on the banner, baby. That's
And
cool.
I still have my 1,000 point ball, I mean, I
Yeah.
worked hard for it. That was very important to me in
No
those days.
kidding. No kidding. That's awesome, man. So you graduate from Chestnut High. Did you have a favorite subject in high school?
I mean, I've always been interested in anything that was strategic.
Yeah.
That makes sense. So
Sure.
high school to me was not really that interesting, to be honest. And in fact, Mike, I was talking about this the other day with one of my friends. Every degree I've gotten, my GPA has gone up from
Yeah.
high school to college to MBA, another master's at NYU, and now I'm getting a doctorate at University of Florida in
Right.
business administration. And it's funny because I keep getting better. And I don't know if it's the school's getting easier or I'm getting more experienced. I don't know what it is, but or maybe I'm just more focused. But back in high school, I did enough. I did enough to do well,
Mhm.
but I was never really that interested in most of the stuff they were teaching, to be honest.
I got you. It's okay. That's all right. So growing up, who was the most influential person to you?
Well, far and away, my mom. I mean,
Yeah.
she basically was everything to me, and also was um, very important in just helping bring out the best in me, because we didn't have money, but she gave me everything else,
Yeah.
and she gave that to me in excess, in a sense, whether it was attention and love and instilling the right type of discipline and work ethic,
Mhm.
and being relentless. I mean, one of the things about my mom is that she's relentless, right? Like,
Mhm.
she will do whatever it takes to survive and thrive. And so I picked that up from her just by watching. I didn't,
Mhm.
of course, we'd have conversations, because she always treated me, even when I was very, very little, almost as an adult. Right.
Mhm.
I knew how bad our situation was, and I knew things that she needed to do to get us, over the hump to survive. And so from a very young age, I was well aware that if I didn't do what I needed to do
Mhm.
in terms of education, in terms of sports, I wasn't going to have the opportunity to go to
Right.
college, let alone a great school like Swarthmore College, where I eventually
Right.
went. So she was far and away the most influential, and still is. And she's also just a great person.
Yeah.
She never has a bad thing to say about anybody. She's super sweet, almost to a point of fault, in a sense. I'd like her to be a little bit more discerning around people that want to hang out with her or
Mhm.
be in her life. But she was number one, and then and number two, when I was in, I think it was sixth grade, I was playing at elementary school basketball at Devotion School in Brookline in Coolidge Corner. And it's
Mhm.
since been renamed. I forget what it's called now, but it was called Edward Devotion School back when I went there. And I basically was fortunate in that I met a man named Fred, who was an ex-basketball player who had grown up in the Mission Hill area of Boston, which was pretty notorious in terms of being a tough, tough area of town, so to speak.
Mhm.
And Fred was actually a bus painter for the MBTA in
Hmm.
Boston, the Mass Bay Transportation Authority. And so he would get off work at about 2 o'clock, which is when we'd be getting out of school, like
Right.
2:30, get out. We'd all head to the hoops courts outside every
Right.
day and play until the sun went down or after. And so he was in his 50s at that point when I was in sixth grade, or probably early 50s, mid 50s. And he was just playing hoops to get back in shape, because he had, played when he was younger. And so
Mhm.
he kind of became like a coach to all the kids there, right? I mean, he would come down and he was just playing to get back in shape, and play for an hour or two after work before he go home to his wife and kids. And he has two daughters that are, were both, um, when I was in middle school, they were probably in their, 20s.
Mhm.
And so, they weren't living with him at the time, but they were, very close. And so he had his family life going on, but he spent a lot of time helping us as kids learn the fundamentals, And eventually he helped us get it, not just me, but a lot of us, especially those that were really focused. He helped get us on good AAU teams,
Oh,
helped get
cool.
us on good traveling teams. And for me, we just formed a really special relationship where it started out being focused on basketball, but then it became more of a life mentoring type relationship, almost like a godfather, if you will.
Yeah, that's
And
cool.
Fred's turning 87 this summer.
Oh,
He's doing well up in Boston, and I'm gonna go. I go to see him, and he was definitely the number two. And outside of those two, my mom and Fred, I never really had people that really like helped me that much.
gotcha.
But with those two, I was able to really get a lot of support and get to where I am.
That's awesome, dude. So you go to Swarthmore College. Why Swarthmore?
So so at the time, this was in when I was a junior in high school. I was
Mhm.
pretty good at basketball, and so I had a lot of colleges recruiting me. And to be honest, I wasn't quite good enough to play at what I call like a tier one, top 50 Division I school, but I was
Right.
definitely good enough to play for the other, 250 Division I schools. But a lot of them weren't really that good academically. And my goal was always to get the best education possible.
Yeah.
And at the time, excuse me, Swarthmore was rated number one in the country as a liberal arts college.
Gotcha.
And so I thought, okay, this is pretty interesting. And actually, the story's kind of funny. We should go down this rabbit hole briefly.
It's all
So
right.
at the
Let's go.
time, Swarthmore had a coach named Lee Wimberly,
Mhm.
and Lee had actually coached with Greg Popovich
Yeah.
years before at I think it was Pomona Pitzer. So West
Yeah.
Coast, small
Uh-huh.
Division III school, and they became best friends. So Lee was best friends with Greg Popovich, and so Lee, when he was recruiting me, he said, who we really would like you to come to Swarthmore. Any players that you like, and who do you kind of emulate your game after? I said, well, knowing that he was friends with Popovich, I said, I really like Avery Johnson.
Mhm.
And this was true. I liked Avery Johnson, but he wasn't my favorite player. But what set Avery Johnson apart was he was somebody who came from humble beginnings as well. He was never drafted out of college,
Yeah.
and
Very
he
humble
he
beginning. Yeah.
basically just scrapped his way to the top and eventually became starting point guard for the Spurs. And he
Mhm.
was a leader, and he wasn't the most talented player, but he got it done because of his work ethic and his
Yeah.
leadership. And so I did really admire him, and I also knew that would resonate with Coach Wimberly. So to make a long story medium, as they say,
Yeah.
he said, "Okay, great." Maybe like a week later, I got a letter in the mail from Avery Johnson,
Mhm.
and it said, Coach Wimberly's the best. You should go to Swarthmore, yada yada yada. And I thought that was nice. And so I eventually went to
Very
visit
cool.
Swarthmore. Yeah, it was cool. And so I went to visit Swarthmore, and really really loved the people that I met there. And so as soon as I went there and visited, it was kind of like game on.
Yeah.
I knew I was going to go there. And so fast forward to when I started in the fall of 2000.
Mhm.
So I get to Swarthmore, which is outside of Philly for those that don't know. So I go down from Boston to Philly, and Wimberly says, "Yeah, why don't we meet at the field house so we can catch up?" So I go down to the field house, and Lee is funny because he was very overweight and he was a chain smoker, right?
Mhm.
And so he did not look like a basketball coach. And whenever he'd be leading us in drills, he would start sweating profusely, and we always worried about his health a little bit. So I walk into Lee's office, and he's chain smoking as usual, and he's got this great laugh, right? Where he kind of sounds like Santa Claus when he laughs. So I go in, and he starts laughing. And this is the first time I've really like heard that laugh in person in full. And he said, that letter you got from Avery Johnson was actually written by Pop's secretary.
Really?
I thought that was the funniest thing because I was thinking in my head, well, Avery Johnson is not even my favorite player. He was like, so it
Yeah.
was kind of like we both duped each other. And so we both got a good laugh about that. And to this day, I still have that letter somewhere in a shoebox. I should probably find it because it's a good story. And Lee was he was a good person. He's no longer alive. He passed away, unfortunately. But um, he's a good person, and definitely Swarthmore for me was a great experience. I wouldn't trade it for anything.
What'd you get your degree in?
So I studied economics.
Okay. Okay. So that makes sense considering what you do for a living, right? So you graduate from Swarthmore. What happens? Where do you go?
So the thing about Swarthmore is it's not well known.
Mhm.
And even though it's a great school, it doesn't really resonate with most people. Like
Right.
if I tell people I went to Swarthmore College, they usually thought that was a community college or something
Yeah.
like that, right? And so it, the options were not as large as I would have liked coming out of Swarthmore, given how good
Right.
the school is. But that said, I had some good opportunities, and I eventually, after a year of working for a consulting firm in Jersey, got a good job at Thomson, which became Thomson Reuters.
Hmm.
And Thomson is a huge company, does a lot of things. And so what I was doing there was really what's called equity market surveillance.
Hmm.
So I was helping publicly traded companies understand who owned their stock in real time,
Yeah.
right? Understanding who are the buyers, who are the sellers, and then helping them position their company's message to attract the right type of capital, meaning
Gotcha.
investors that were long-term holders that were aligned with their vision and their,
Yeah.
company's story. Because what no company wants is activist investors that come in and basically want to shake up the company and shake up the board. And so that was really what they were paying us for, was to protect them against activist investors, like the Carl Icahns of the world.
Yeah. It's
And
almost like a
also,
defense kind of thing.
correct, yeah. So
Yeah.
it's basically like buying insurance to make
Yeah.
sure that your management team is not going to get upset by an activist that comes in and wants to create a new management team.
Right.
And so that was great because it really exposed me to the equity markets, and I got some great training there. And that really set the stage for my first job that was an investment role, where I was at Scotiabank.
Okay.
So I started at Scotiabank in 2007, and for those that don't know, Scotia is the third largest Canadian bank,
Hmm.
and they've got a big US presence as well. And so I worked for Scotia in New York, which is also where I worked for Thomson in downtown New York. And my main job was to basically uh, underwrite large media and telecom companies. And so it's providing them with debt capital. And
Okay.
so we were funding companies, like some of my clients at the time, that deals I helped execute were uh, Verizon,
Hmm.
Comcast, Madison Square Garden, Viacom, CBS, some of the big TV broadcasters like Sinclair,
Hmm.
Lynn Media, or excuse me, Lynn TV, Media General, billboard companies like Lamar, Clear Channel, um, also some of the movie chains. So Regal,
Oh, okay.
AMC, National Amusements, a lot of the wireless and wireline companies. And at the
Hmm.
time, and you'll appreciate this, Mike, because you've been around long enough. When I first started there, one of the first deals that came across was a Yellow Page deal. So it was
Yeah.
Dex Media.
Yeah.
And I remember this was 2007, so this was before the iPhone had hit, but we
Hmm.
still had the flip phones and the Blackberries. And it was interesting, and this was a great learning lesson, because the bank really wanted to do the deal because it was a long-time client, and historically Yellow Pages had very high cash flow margins and were a
Hmm.
very good customer. They always repaid their debt. And I remember there was a bit of a divide because the older folks at the bank weren't really as technology savvy and
Hmm.
in tune with trends. And the younger folks that had a much smaller say in the decision thought, hey, like, you can look up all this information online. There's going to be
Right.
no reason to have a big yellow book
Right.
anymore. And
Right.
so we wound up doing the deal, and it went, it went bad pretty quickly,
Hmm.
because everything changed overnight
Yeah.
once Apple released the iPhone, and people realized, wow, you'll never need a book where the information's stale. You can get it not only on your computer at home, but also in your pocket.
Yeah.
And so that was a nice learning lesson for me, and it kind of has stuck with me, because what it showed is that technology paradigms can shift overnight.
Fast. Fast.
Exactly,
Yeah. Like
exactly.
that was a rapid shift.
Yes, it was almost like within a couple months, it
Yeah.
all changed, right?
Yeah.
And so that taught me a lot in terms of, when you think about where the world's going, you have to be prepared for paradigm shifts. And just because other people don't see it
Hmm.
and the consensus doesn't see it, doesn't mean that you can't see it. And
Right.
that taught me a lot also, because I started to think, you know, I don't need to I don't need to follow the consensus, because the consensus is often going to be wrong. And most of the time they are.
Yeah.
And so from the
That's
very
why
beginning,
contrarians do so well.
exactly. And, like that, so that was an important lesson for me. And the other lesson, and we can get into this when we talk about business schools. I remember, so I went to University of Chicago
Mhm.
after Scotia. So 2010, I decided I wanted to go back to business school. So went to University of Chicago Booth School of Business to do a full-time MBA. And I studied analytic finance and economics as my concentrations. And I remember sitting, this is probably my second year. Maybe it was my first year, but it was after I'd been there for a bit. And I was sitting in a class, and it was, full class, probably like 100 people. And I was looking around the room thinking, man, these folks are going to be leaders of the financial world
Mhm.
in 10 to 20 years.
Mhm.
Most of them are going to lead whatever business they're at. And I remember thinking, they're all impressive, but there's nothing they can do that I don't think I can do as well.
Yeah.
Like, in other words, people always talk about this imposter syndrome.
Mhm.
I never had that. I've
Yeah.
always felt from the beginning I belonged there, and I wanted to kick in the door to make sure I got in that room, right? And once I was there, I realized, oh yeah, I do belong here.
Yeah.
And you know what? Not only do I belong here, but I think I can be the best here. And
Well,
that
that's cool because that's confidence inspiring, right? I mean, you get an opportunity to sort of see what the playing field is, and all of a sudden you're looking at it and you're going, "Oh, okay, this is not necessarily what everybody thinks it is," right? And you're sitting there going, "I can hang with these guys," right? In fact, I could probably dominate this, right? Let's go back for just a second, if it's okay. You're at Scotiabank and you're really honestly kicking tail, like you're doing really well. What is it that compels you to go back to school? I mean, obviously, University of Chicago is a big deal, right? Top economic school. I mean, that's the place to go if you're going to study economics. Okay, so University of Chicago, that part's a no-brainer. But what makes you leave Scotiabank and go back to school?
it's a great question. So I'll rewind a little bit and tell you
Okay.
another anecdote from Scotia. So while I was at Scotia, I began mentoring kids in various programs.
Okay.
So I was a mentor in the Eugene Lang's I Have a Dream program, and I was a mentor in Big Brothers, where every
Okay.
week I would meet with my little brother for a full year.
Okay.
And I was doing that because I really felt that I could make an impact, and it was something that I knew helped me, even though I'd never been in Big Brothers. Like I said before, Fred was basically like
Mhm.
that, big brother,
Yeah.
uncle, right?
Yeah.
That really, helped me in so many ways. And Fred gave me a lot of guidance and a lot of confidence. And so
Mhm.
when I would, not play well in basketball, he was always there to offer encouragement. And that really meant a lot to me. And I felt like if I could do the same for somebody else,
Yeah.
that I knew it would be impactful because I knew how impactful it was for me.
Well,
And
you're
so
paying it forward.
exactly,
And that's
exactly.
important, right? When we have an opportunity to give back, when we have an opportunity to pay it forward, we need to do that in honor of people like Fred, right? Fred didn't have to help you. Fred helped you because it brought him joy and he cared about you, right? Still does. That's a big deal. When you're looking back and you're seeing that, that's a big pivot in your life. And he gave you a hand up. And it's important that we listen to this kind of thing. And it's important that we act on this, that we take the opportunity and the initiative to go out and give back and to pay it forward. It's a big deal. I'm glad you did that. That's big.
Well, yeah, to me, anyone who's successful does owe it to society and to those that are less fortunate,
I agree
to
with
go
that.
back and help them the same way they were helped, right?
Yeah.
And so the lesson with Lee was, so Lee was my little brother.
Yeah.
So he was great. He and his mother were from China. His dad wasn't in the picture. Basically, a single mom, and he was a great kid, but he was having a little bit of trouble assimilating to American culture.
Yeah.
And so part of what I was doing was just taking him out every week, and just basically being a big brother that he could count on to help talk through things, give him confidence. And we had a ton of fun. It was really just about building a strong relationship and giving him that confidence to know that he could go and do anything that he wants to do.
Yeah.
And And so the takeaway from mentoring Lee, and then I had a little sister in the I Have a Dream program named Brittany, who is great as well. And so there were different age levels. Lee was a 10th grader, Brittany was in middle school. And so I had, had great success with both of them. I really liked both of them. And I liked also just the programs where we, interacting with other mentors as well that had, intentions to give back, and were really like focused on helping kids. And so what happened is after I'd finished my year with Lee, I started to think about, how do I scale this? Because it had been so impactful for Lee, but it was only one person.
Yeah.
And I thought, wow, there's thousands of other kids, hundreds of thousands, but in New
Hmm.
York alone, within a couple mile radius, there was thousands of kids that could use that type of guidance and
Yeah.
mentoring. And so I went back to Big Brothers and I said, listen, I had such a great experience, and I think I can help build something bigger.
Mhm.
What are the options? What can we do to partner together to make this bigger? And they said, well, we have something called a workplace mentoring program,
Okay.
whereby you would, go get buy-in from your employer, and it costs money. So you'd have to raise some money and get a bunch of mentors signed up. And then what we do is, for a full year, we bring in an entire class of high school kids, and each kid would be paired with a mentor
Mhm.
at the institution. And so I thought, wow, this is actually pretty cool. And so I started researching it, and I thought, okay, this is going to be huge, but I need to figure out how to get it funded.
Right.
And so at the time, the woman that ran Scotiabank in the US was named Catherine Kiplinger. So I
Mhm.
went to Catherine and I basically said, here's my story.
Mhm.
Here's why I got involved in mentoring. Here's the impact it had on me and the impact it had on Lee and Brittany. I want to do something bigger, and I want to involve Scotia.
Mhm.
And what I did is I sold her on the fact that it would be very beneficial for the organization, because I had data from Big Brothers that showed it increased employee engagement, it increased retention, and it also was great for, branding and marketing, of course,
Mhm.
right? And so economically, I showed her what the benefits would be. And she was a big supporter. And quite frankly, she had always been a very big supporter of mine at the bank. And even before that, she was always very interested in my background and supportive of the work that I was doing there. And so she agreed to fund the whole thing, through
Wow.
Scotiabank. Yep.
That's
And
awesome, man.
it
Good
was,
job.
Mike, man, it was amazing. So get this, and this was 2009. It was the only workplace mentoring program started and run in 2009, because we were in the depths
Yeah.
of the financial crisis.
Yeah.
And
Everybody
so,
was trying to recover.
exactly. And what people often forget is that good deeds like this that take money get pushed to the wayside when we're in a recession or when we're in a difficult economic environment. And
It's the
so,
last thing. It's the last thing on the priority list.
exactly, and it shouldn't be. And this
I
is
agree.
why, just like the economy goes in bull market and bear market cycles, so too does support for nonprofits
Yeah.
or certain initiatives. I mean, look, even now you can see there's a lot of support that was generated for like diversity, equity, and inclusion in like 2021, and now there's a lot of, people that are kind of fighting against that, right? It goes
Yeah.
in waves, right? And so, um, what wound up happening is we had a very, very successful program. I was able to get a ton of senior people at the bank to commit to mentoring in this program. And then it was so successful that we wound up getting to ring the bell on the New York Stock Exchange for National
Ooh.
Mentoring Month. I think it was
Yeah.
2011 that we did that.
I
And so,
love it.
yeah, and so I was already in business school by
Yeah.
the time that they rang the bell. But it was pretty cool to see the program that I developed, recognized. And for what it's worth, this goes back to your question about why did I want to go to business school.
Yeah.
So, as much as I love Scotia, and it was probably, the place I enjoyed working most in my career, because the people were just great people. I just like I wanted to scale the mentoring,
Mhm.
I wanted to scale my own career. And
Yeah.
I looked at what people had accomplished that had become very successful in finance,
Right.
and the majority, had an MBA or
Yeah.
they had a CFA. And so it's funny, I had actually gotten the CFA already, because when I was at Thompson, I was reading a lot of sell side research reports where, the analysts from the banks, from Goldman Sachs and JP Morgan and Citi and Bank of America, et cetera, they would write, research reports on all the stocks. Buy
Right.
this stock, sell this stock. And I noticed there was a pattern in their backgrounds. And the pattern was that most of these top ranked research analysts that were making millions of dollars had an MBA from a top 5 school.
Yep.
And they also had a CFA. And I thought,
Yeah.
okay, well, I want to do what those guys are doing. I want to get paid like that. So what do I have to do? I got to get the CFA.
Yeah.
And then I need to go get a top 5 MBA. And so that was my plan. And so that was really what kind of drove me to go to business schools. I didn't know exactly what I wanted to do 20 years later, but I knew that having an MBA from Chicago and a CFA would propel me
Yeah.
to wherever I wanted to go.
Yeah. So that's awesome, man. So what was the single most important thing that you learned getting your master's degree, earning your master's degree from University of Chicago?
But like I said before, I think it was this epiphany moment where I was sitting in class and I realized these are going to be the leaders of the financial industry, and therefore so am I. If I continue to work really hard and be helpful and never stop learning.
Gotcha. Gotcha. Okay. So you graduate with your master's degree. Where do you go from there?
So this was kind of like the first kind of big jump in my life, I feel like. I mean, I had many, I guess, but I really wanted to work on Wall Street as a bond trader. And
Really?
and at that time, the biggest bank in the world was Deutsche Bank.
Yeah.
And Deutsche in 2012, when they were the largest in the world, when I graduated from Chicago, had a balance sheet of 2.8 trillion,
Mm-hmm.
and they were number one ranked in fixed income trading,
Wow.
right? And so I thought, okay, that's where I want to go. So I worked extremely hard while at Chicago to recruit at all the banks, right?
Mm-hmm.
But especially Deutsche Bank. That was the spot I really wanted. Excuse me. And so I was actually hired by DB, by
Yeah.
Deutsche, and I was the only credit trader they hired globally that year out of an MBA program. So I
Wow.
literally got like the best job you could get, the most sought after trading job in the world for MBAs in 2012. And
Wow. It's cool.
Mike, that was huge because it really, Scotia was great.
Mhm.
Scotia's the third biggest Canadian bank. Deutsche was the biggest bank in the world,
Yeah.
and they were beasts, right?
Yeah.
And so when I went to DB, I worked at 60 Wall Street. We had hundreds of traders on the trading floor, and I worked for some of the best traders on the planet that now run multi-trillion-dollar trading shops, right? So that to me was huge, and one event that kind of sticks with me when I was a trader there. And so for what it's worth, I was trading corporate bonds,
Mhm.
and I was also trading credit default swaps
Right.
(CDS), as well as some what they call hybrid securities. So basically preferred stock,
Mhm.
and also securities that had both equity and debt characteristics, hence why they call them hybrid, right?
Right.
So I was basically trading a bunch of different products, and a lot of the corporate names I was trading were names that were kind of what they call crossover credits, meaning they could be either high yield or investment grade. They're right on the border. And so I'll give you some examples, like Ford, for instance.
Mhm.
Ford had been downgraded because if you recall, the
Yeah.
automakers almost went out of business during the
Yeah. They almost went
GFC.
bankrupt.
Yeah, they had
Yeah.
to get bailed out. And so Ford had been downgraded to high yield, right?
Yeah.
They were not investment grade. But then as the economy started to improve, and this was 2012,
Mhm.
2013, they're then getting upgraded back into the investment grade segment. And so there were other names like that, like Ford, AIG, the large insurance
Yep.
company that had been almost went out of
Yeah.
business also,
Right.
and Ally Financial, Sally Mae. These were all companies that were coming out of high yield
Mhm.
into investment grade. So basically, I had to interface with both the investment grade trading desk, which is where I technically sat, but also the
Yeah.
high yield trading desk, and also the equity folks because of the fact that I was trading preferred securities
Yeah.
that had equity characteristics as well. So it was a pretty cool learning experience. It was like drinking from a fire hose.
Mhm.
And for what it's worth, I tell people today, like, hey, you have it easy today. Like if you knew the stuff that you had to go through even 12, 15 years ago to get
Yeah.
a job like that, you'd be thrilled with how easy it is today. I mean,
Mhm.
I remember I would get to the trading desk 5:30 in the morning, 6 in
Mhm.
the morning. I'd be there till 8, 9 at night,
Yep.
right? And it starts out simple where they want you to get their breakfast sandwiches and make sure they have like their newspaper. Nobody reads a newspaper anymore. They did to some extent, 12 years ago. And
we hope you enjoyed another episode of the Mike Litton Experience. If you did, do us a favor, smash that subscribe button, tell your friends, family, and coworkers about our program, and wherever you get your podcasts, please leave us a rating. It helps us to connect with quality people just like you.
And that's a wrap. Another episode of the Mike Litton Experience in the books. Reach out to Mike on Instagram at Litton Realty. Want to meet with Mike? Check out calendly.com/Rio760.